So I'm going to talk about Shoot Christians Say. Have any of y'all seen the videos? It's like Southern women say, and there's one called progressive Christians say, and that one's really funny. If you do any conversations with folks like that, and then there's one instead of Christians say, it's called Shoot Christians Say. And why is it you think they did that? They're never going to watch it if it's got the word, huh? They can read it at work. It's not just that. They can read it anywhere. It's a swear word, right? Even if you put the asterisk between the H and the T, that's still not okay, because that's a euphemism. And if you come from a really religious background, euphemisms are just as bad as the words themselves. So like a lot of families, raise your hand if it was not okay to say darn or shoot in your family, okay? Several of y'all do know what I'm talking about. Some of the better ones I've heard are, Kylie, are you in the room? Okay, Kylie told me that they have one where they would say, got down, sat on a bench. And they got in trouble for that because got down, sat on a bench was obviously supposed to be something else, and it was meant to get as close as they could to cursing without actually doing it. Eventually those become like cursing too, and you have to come up with new euphemisms. But Shoot Christians Say is actually one of the ways that you can talk about this without actually using a dirty word, so now they can watch it. But I've already said the word 2 or 3 times, so I'm going to have to go back in and delete this so that my children can watch it later on. You know? All right, hold on. So Shoot Christians Say. I'm going to talk about what they say to me and what they say to you, I'm sure, if you came from a very religious background. And I'm going to talk about what I say in response. Okay? First of all, they come up with a lot of unhelpful suggestions. That's the first thing they do. You can nod your head if you identify with this. Try reading the Bible. That's one of the first things they say. Of course, this is an ongoing joke with atheists, because if you ask them, what book most influenced you to leave your faith, what do they usually say? Read the Bible. Okay, I have a degree in Bible. That's one of the reasons probably why I left. The harder you throw yourself into studying it, the better the chances are you're going to figure out, wait a second, some things aren't right here. All right? Why don't you try praying about it? This is insulting to me. I don't know about you. Maybe you were one of those people that flipped a switch and all of a sudden you just quit believing. But it's not that easy for a lot of us. For many of us, it takes years to work our way through this. And we pray at every stage of the process, all the way through our deconversion. And in many cases, we pray years later because we just can't shake the habit. We're just trying to make sure we cover all our bases, I guess. Eventually you get to the point where you think, this is just silly because I don't even believe this anymore. I know it doesn't do anything. It doesn't even make me feel better anymore. But it's insulting for people to say, maybe you should try this. You know? Read this one book that I've never read, but I've heard it's great. What's funny about this is apologetics books are written presumably for us, for people who do not believe in their religion, to convince us that their religion is the right one. But when we read them, they're terrible because we see all the problems with it. It's only appealing, most of these books, to the people who are already inclined to believe what's being said, because the arguments are terrible. Have you ever read A Case for Christ? I know 3 people who deconverted reading The Case for Christ. Right? Okay? When I was a teenager, it was Josh McDowell and the case, what was it, the Evidence That Demands a Verdict. It was like this thick. And everybody that I knew had a copy of that book, and none of them read it. They bought it so they could put it on the shelf and feel better that it existed. They flipped through it, saw how many words were in it, and were like, wow, I'm just so glad somebody took the time to say all this. And then they never read it. And that's the way it goes. So the funny thing about apologetics isn't for the lost. It's for the saved. It's for them to feel better about what they believe, to feel like they are intellectually sound for believing what they believe. But ironically, they never actually read it because it's boring and nobody actually converts from reading this stuff, you know? So read this one book. Lately, the new one, instead of Mere Christianity, what's replaced that now is Reason for God. That's the new one by Tim Keller. I'm going to rip that one to shreds pretty soon, but not today. Okay. Writing you off. This is another category of things that they do, and they do it like this. First of all, it's a phase. You'll grow out of it. How condescending and patronizing is that? You know, because what if we turned around and did the same thing to them? What if we said, you know, Dad, I remember when I used to believe things too, like you believe, but maybe you'll grow out of it. I would probably not remember the next thing that happened after that, because my dad could probably still take me. And it would be insulting and patronizing. And I think sometimes we might actually have to say things back to them. You know, in counseling settings, they have this thing called mirroring, where you say, okay, let me tell you what I'm hearing from you. All right, let me reverse this and turn the tables, and let me say what you're saying back to me. I've tried that incidentally with family members, and it just, you know, they don't get it. Like with Pascal's wager, which I'll get to again in just a second. If only you'd been exposed to true Christianity, to the right version. I get this all the time, and of course you don't get this from family because many times they're from the same denomination you are, so that wouldn't work. It's the people that don't know you. They come in and they automatically think, you just got the wrong one. The one you got was too emotional, or it wasn't emotional enough. The one you got was too interventionist. You need to believe this other version where God never shows up, you know, which is really easy to defend, right? And one of the things that ticks me off about the process of having to talk to some of my religious friends is that when they're with each other, God is everywhere all the time, showing up constantly and speaking to them constantly. But then when I begin to ask questions about how I'm supposed to know that God exists, suddenly he's nowhere. He's invisible, and he hides himself. And I'm bad for asking for him to show up. You know, they guilt you for that. Exactly the opposite of what the Bible does. It talks like you're supposed to be able to see God just about all over the place. So if only you had had true Christianity. The shortcut to this conversation that I've learned is instead of trying to defend the version I came from, to argue that it's the true version of religion, of Christianity, I ask them, so which one is the right one? Can you spell that out for me? We can talk about that. Save yourself hours of running around and around the block. Let them tell you what the right one is. You know what they're going to do? They're going to change the subject. Because they know that the moment you try to talk about their specific version, you're going to start poking holes in it. They don't want you to do that. So they're going to just be evasive and change the subject. All right. You must not have ever really believed, you know, because a true Christian will never leave. How many of you have been a Christian at some point in your life? More than half, okay, hands down. How many of you have had someone tell you that you weren't really a true Christian and you never really believed? Almost half, okay, not everybody. Again, this is not the kind of stuff you have to deal with if you're in a non-religious environment, okay? If I lived in Oregon or Germany or some other place like that, I might not get this kind of stuff all the time. And you can say things like, you know, sticks and stones, these are just words, just brush them off. It's no big deal. It's not that hard to deal with people's objections because who cares what they think anyway, right? No, it's more than that. If you come from places like Mississippi, or I used to think it was a southern thing, and like I keep telling people, it's everywhere. It's not just the South. It's the moment you get 20 minutes outside of any major city in the U.S., you're back in the Bible Belt. Isn't that true? Any state is the Bible Belt. So this is the kind of reaction you're going to get. Again, it's not just words. It starts with words, but before long, it's exclusionary behavior. It's cutting you off from relationships. It's people avoiding you, not including you in things. It's broken families. It's lost jobs. It's lost incomes. There are even some situations in which physical abuse might be a result. And the people who say, just brush this off, it's only the mentally disabled that say things like that. No, it's not. It's your doctor and your lawyer and your spouse and your dad and your, not just the preacher, but the governor and the Supreme Court Chief Justice. I mean, these are the people that are running things where I live. These aren't the mentally deranged. These are highly intelligent people, many of them smarter than I am. So don't give me that talk about how that's just like a small, you know, sample of people. No, it's not. Where I am, it's everywhere. Okay, moving along. It's a relationship. If you could just understand, it's a relationship, not a religion. All right, this is called special pleading, of course, where you say, see, our version is different from all other versions, and none of the rules apply to ours that apply to any others. And I used to be one of these people. You know, I used to talk this way. It's a relationship, not a religion. And, of course, the thinking here is that if you only understood correctly that Christianity is better than all the others because it's about love, it's about being in a relationship, it's not about following rules. And, you know, they're hoping to react against all the legalism that they think must be the reason why you're leaving. I didn't come from a legalistic background. I wasn't a fundamentalist. I wasn't. I was from a nicer side of evangelicalism, an intelligent side. We were all very well educated. We were very good at rationalizing the things we believed, you know? And so we talked like this. But When someone says it's a relationship, and you begin to ask questions, so, if it's a relationship, does that mean that I'm free to reject it if I'm not interested? I mean, if someone offers a relationship to me and I say, okay, but I'm free to say no, right? If you ask them that, they're going to be like, but, and they start qualifying and saying, so what will happen if I don't? And they say, well, you're going to miss out on the best life you could possibly have. And I say, well, isn't that my job to decide whether or not I like the life I have now versus the one that you're offering me? And they're like, no, it's not your job. You don't know. You don't know what's right for you. Now you've just lost me. You've just depersonalized me and said that you know better than I do, and you've just stepped over a boundary. You have to actually tell them that because they don't have a vocabulary for that. But anyway, if it's a relationship, not a religion, then there should not be a threat of punishment if I choose to reject it. But if you talk long enough, the threat is going to appear. You know what I'm talking about. Okay. Then there's the questioning your sincerity. This one really gets at me, you know? All right, so for example, they'll say, you just want to be your own boss, you know? You just want to live how you want to live. My favorite response to that is, when does that start? You know? I'm ready for that time to start. Is that going to start sometime soon? Maybe when I'm 50, maybe when I'm 60? Because it seems to me that most of my days are doing what everybody else needs. It's called being an adult. And so, no, I'm not my own boss. There's like all these short people that are my boss most of the time. And no, that's a lie. That's a lie. Okay. Nice try, though. Why are you so angry at God? And of course, this one's pretty easy to dismiss, even though they're convinced that they know better than you do what's going on. All you have to do is ask them how many gods they don't believe in and why they're angry at all of them. And of course, their response is, no, that's not the same, because those aren't real. And you say, no, that's exactly the problem. I don't think yours is real, so how am I going to be angry at something I don't think is real? You know, one guy said, I dislike Yahweh in the same way that I dislike Jar Jar Binks. In fact, I hate Jar Jar Binks. But it's not because it's a real thing. It's a poorly designed literary character, as is Yahweh, right? Of course, Jar Jar Binks. Throw in a Star Wars reference. Yeah, it's a poorly conceived literary character. Yahweh's the same way. All right. Don't judge God by the actions of his people. Yeah, okay. So here's the problem with that. You would actually be telling me to do that when they do things right. See, when you do nice things for me, you tell me when I tell you thank you, they say, don't thank me, thank God. God has done this for you. They want you to give God credit anytime one of his people do something good. But when one of his people do something bad, now he's not supposed to be credited for that. That's very convenient. We call that selection bias. Okay? But that's actually not a bad thing to do, to some degree. But here's the other problem. They assume that the behavior of Christians is the reason why we don't think there's a God. That might be what starts some people down that journey. But ultimately, I think Penn said this last night, no, it's not that people mistreated me. It's the whole God not existing thing. That's the reason I don't believe. I know that's the way you want to frame it. And there's Bible verses that talk like the behavior of Christians are going to be what proves to people that Jesus is who he says he was. But you want to get real specific? You know what he said would prove that he's real? The unity of Christians. It's in John 17. You can go look it up. He said in his final prayer in John 17 that the way the world will know that I am who I said I am is that my followers will be one, even as the Father and I are one. So he actually had the nerve to bank his credibility on the unity of the Christian church. That is the most failed prayer in history, right? So we can be excused for interpreting the lack of unity among Christians as evidence that he was not who he says he was. If he was a real person, of course. We have mythicists among us. Pulling your heartstrings. This happens a lot with families, okay? Some of y'all will probably recognize some of these tactics. Your mother is so worried for you. She cries herself to sleep every night. You know, we pray for you every night. We've been sharing with our prayer circles about the fact that you've left. And of course, now that I'm out, I understand that prayer chains are actually just gossip chains. You know, you can say anything you want once you say it's a prayer request, right? You know, bless her heart. My sister, she's just been sleeping around with everyone, and my heart just aches for her. I mean, you learn to say these things. It's so passive-aggressive, all right? Your mother is worried for you. That's a passive-aggressive thing to do, and they're trying to manipulate you. I know they don't mean to, but your parents being upset is not a good reason to believe in God. Think through this for just a second, okay? Another heartstrings method. When times get tough, you'll see. You'll come running back. Let me tell you what I hear when I hear this. When someone tells me this, that when I'm reduced to my lowest point, I will finally see the way and the light. They're saying that it's when I am the most emotionally compromised, that is the time when I'm in the best position to make a major life decision. Think about it. There is a red flag here that indicates that their religion, whatever form they're pushing on you, is a predatory religion because it preys on the lowest point a person has. There's a hilarious Onion article that I linked in one of the blog posts. By the way, I write a blog called Godless and Dixie. And I know, yeah, thank you. But if you haven't heard of it yet, please go check it out because I work really hard on writing that. And everything I say there is like real things. These are like real conversations with real people, and it's crazy, but it really happens. So people have told me this a number of times, and my thought is, yeah, this is predatory. The Onion article shows a guy who's like homeless, and he's hungry and he's destitute, and every major world religion is like fighting for his subscription because he's exactly what they want. He's been reduced to nothing. Anyway, it's Onion. Okay. How can you look at your children and not believe? Where do you even start with that? I should probably make a side note here that I don't actually engage all of my friends in debate because I know that it's pointless most of the time. I really know that. I almost have to be frustrated before I start debating because I always exhaust the real conversation first because that's what I really want. And when I finally realize that's not what they want, they just want to preach at me, then I just start debating because I'm like, okay, you know what, fine. Or I just cut off the conversation. But when they say things like this to me, I want to know, okay, you're saying that because my children were born healthy and because they're pretty, and they are. My kids are cute. They just are. They're very cute kids. And they say, how can you look at your child's face and not believe in God? You're arguing that because the child is born healthy and maybe even beautiful, that's evidence of an intelligent, benevolent creator. But wouldn't the corollary of that be that if my kids were born ugly, or if they were born deformed, that's evidence that there isn't a God? Because that's the corollary. That's what you're saying. And I don't think that they've ever thought through it that way. And if you try to reflect that back to them, they're going to be horrified. No, I wouldn't say that. Again, selection bias. Selection bias, that's what that's called. But you guys know that. Then finally, I'm going to end with these. There's the gotcha quotes. These are the ones that they've probably read a book, or maybe they've just read the title of the book. That's about as far as they made it. The last one I'm going to show you is literally the title of the book, because it's like once they got the title out, that's really all they had to say. These are the gotcha quotes that they think if they could just maybe hit you with this, you won't know what to say, and I guess you'll change your mind, like you've never heard these before. What if you're wrong? What do we call this? Pascal's wager, okay? The story I always tell is that when a close family member finally sprung that on me for the first time, he cornered me at one of my weekend jobs and lectured me for 2 hours. Long day. And he said, isn't there at least a 1% chance you could be wrong about God? Can you at least admit that? I said, yes, absolutely. I'm always willing to admit I could be wrong. But my skepticism about my own beliefs is exactly how I got to be where I am. They never seem to understand that. They think that we're as obsessed with certainty as they are. That's actually a problem of people who are in the faith still, not people who are outside of it, most of the time. But he said, if it's just 1% chance that you could be wrong, then why don't you believe just in case? Because the consequences would be so bad. 2 days earlier, I had been in a conversation with a Muslim friend who said the exact same thing about following Muhammad. He said, are you willing to admit there's a 1% chance you could be wrong that Muhammad is his prophet? And I said, I'm willing to admit there might be one chance. And he's like, well, then on that chance, you should at least honor the prophet just in case you could be wrong. So I'm literally damned if I do and damned if I don't, because I'm going to be in one person's hell or the other no matter what I do. And that's one of the problems with Pascal's wager, is it doesn't specify which God you're supposed to be afraid of. Right? It doesn't specify. And not only that, but fear is a terrible reason to believe in the first place. And then beyond that, how are you going to be afraid of something that you don't think is real? So I asked my family member, are you worried about Muslim hell? And he was like, no. And I was like, why not? Well, because it's not real. Ding, 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 and I waited for the light to go off, and it doesn't go off. And it's not because they're not intelligent. I'm telling you, these people are as smart or smarter than I am. It's that a wall goes up. A wall goes up because you know that the consequences of leaving your beliefs can be devastating. Socially, financially, intellectually, you have to rethink everything. And it's exhausting, isn't it? It could take a lot out of you. And you hit that wall and you have to say, I can't go there. The cost is too high. That's why they stop. It's not because they're not smart. It's because they can't stand the consequences of what's going to happen afterwards. All right? Where will you get your morals? Same place you do, you know? Human beings work through these things. My question is to ask them alternatively, where do you get yours? I mean, do you think you get yours from the Bible? Let's talk about that for a minute, all right? That's easy to do. David, by the way, is going to have a hilarious talk tomorrow. You need to see it when he talks about the evil of the Bible. You're not doing that talk? Google it then, okay? David Fitzgerald, Sex in the Bible. They often accuse us of being moral relativists because, of course, without a God, how are you supposed to have a right and a wrong? But, of course, the irony is if I took 100 atheists and put them in a room and asked them to argue that genocide is, under certain circumstances, okay, I'll bet that almost all, there's going to be that one guy, right? But almost all of them are going to say, well, of course that's terrible. There's no good reason to murder an entire town of people just because they're, like, for example, on the land that you want. But get 10 Christians in a room and ask them the same question. Has there ever been a time, or is it possible that God might want someone to kill a town of people to get their land? Well, yeah, it depends. Right? All right, let's do another one. How about, is it ever okay to murder your child? Well, atheists are probably going to say no, probably. I mean, I have a very good likelihood, but go to a group of Christians and they're going to be divided over the question. Because there are, according to the Bible, certain circumstances under which a father, a good father, would need to murder his son, right? You've read the Bible, right? Okay, so the moral relativist is the one who says that good is whatever God says is good. That's relativistic. All right, so off that rant. Try having that conversation, though. All right, where did everything come from? Okay. Well, of course, every 6-year-old knows what's wrong with this question. When you say everything came from, oh, well, there was this giant invisible person that made it, of course that's what people would think of. We would think a giant invisible person is behind everything. That makes perfect sense. But where did that one come from? You know, every 6-year-old knows what's wrong with that statement. And then finally, the one I'm so sick of hearing, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. Didn't this one just get your... Okay, so there's several things about this. By the way, how am I doing on time? I want to see how much... And am I going to have time for Q&A? Just wondering. 5 minutes? Okay. Let me tell you what's wrong with this. This is shoot Christians say to me all the time. They got this from a book title. That's about as deep as they made it into the book. They read the title. They're like, ooh, that's good. I should use that sometime. It's one of the worst books ever. But first of all, are you saying that faith is something that you can have too much of? Is that what you're saying? Okay. Next question is it a bad thing that we have faith, if that's what you're saying? I mean, obviously I have questions about your use of the word faith, but now you're saying it like it's a bad thing. All right? And what do you mean by faith here? What is your definition of faith if what you think we're doing is using faith? Does faith for you then mean that you go beyond what the facts merit? Are you saying that faith means that you don't have enough information to make a decision, but you do it anyway? Is that what you're saying we're doing? And that's how you're using the word faith? Are you sure you want to use that word that way? Because now let's talk about your beliefs for a second, right? Most of them would backtrack and say, no. This is called equivocation. When you take a word and you use it one way in one sentence and another way in the next sentence. It's like when we were in junior high and they would say, do you love chocolate? And I say, yes. Well, why don't you marry it? All right, well, okay, that's called equivocation, right? Everybody knows the word love doesn't mean the same thing and every time you use it, but they use the word faith. In the Bible, they use it to mean believing things that don't seem logical to believe, like that a 100-year-old person is going to start having children for the first time ever. That's not a logical belief. That's going beyond what is logical. But they hem-haw and there's fudge on this, and they say that it's the same thing when a person says, we think that the earth goes around the sun instead of vice versa. That is a belief, but that's not how the Bible at least uses the word faith. So they're equivocating. They're taking a word and they're being fast and loose with it. And it's not fair. They're not playing fair. All right, so let me just wrap this up. All of these are the kinds of things that we hear all of the time. The question is, do we take this opportunity to argue with them about these things? I don't. I don't know about you, but I don't even need them to believe that I am right. At this point, I would be happy with them just respecting my determination of my own beliefs. And if that's the best I can get from them, I can live with that. And this is what we face as former believers ourselves. We have to pick our battles. Our goal is not to try to convince everybody around us that we're right and they're wrong. In Mississippi, that's going to be a losing battle. I'm just going to tell you that right now. But I would feel like it was a success if I could convince them that I am still a rational person. I don't see things the same way they do, and they need to at least make a place of respect for me in the public square. This is why I've actually become more of a fan of people fighting for separation of church and state. And in Mississippi, that could be a very tumultuous thing to step into because people now think that you are the root problem with all of the country, right? In Texas, it's the same way, all right? You can become the pariah, of your town because you're fighting for something they don't understand, but it's worth it. It's worth it, even if it hurts you. If you're in a place to make a difference in that way, there's somebody else who's going to come along after you that's going to have a place of respect made for them, and it may require litigation. It may require the law because you cannot convince people to see things the same way as you do. Sometimes the best you can do is just convince them they have to respect you under the law. All right, well, that's basically where I am. I'm done. And there's not time for Q&A, I don't think, because I see Victor's coming. Thank you all very much for listening.